This is 40K Today, the 40K news show that loves every faction equally, except Tau. No one loves Tau.
Hello and welcome to a special Best of 40K Today. We are your daily dose of 40K news, and we feature content creators from across the globe. We live 40K, and we know you do too. Today, we bring you a selection from our favorite interviews from this week. If you like what you hear, give us a listen during the week at 40ktoday.com, or you can find us via your favorite podcast player. I'm your host, John Damaris, and today on the program, we get a truly inspirational story about overcoming obstacles to enjoy the hobby. We get some great coaching advice from the Art of War. We have an amazing hobby tip, and we travel all the way to Poland to hear all about their scene. Our very own Steve Joel sits down with James, who lost his sight but still enjoys playing 40K. It's a super inspirational story.
James, thanks for joining us on 40K Today. Really appreciate your time, man.
Thanks very much for having me on. I'm really thrilled to be here. I love the show.
Oh, thank you very much. Now, let's cut straight to the chase. You're blind.
Yep.
Which leads me to a whole lot of questions as to how you managed to, I mean, I wear glasses and I find that hard enough with painting and kit bashing and then pushing models around a table. So I want to get to all of that stuff in a second, but let's go back to the beginning of this. You refer in your blog and on your Facebook to a time when you were sighted, before you were blind. Can you explain how you came to be blind in the first place?
I can. I've actually had diabetes since I was 6 years old, and it did a bit of damage when I was a kid. I'm sure we all remember being a teenage boy and thinking we're absolutely indestructible. I didn't look after myself particularly well for a few years, and that had a knock-on effect. By the age of 27, 28, I was starting to lose my sight. So by Christmas 2005, it had completely gone. So since Christmas 2005, give or take a few days, I've had complete blackness, got absolutely no sight whatsoever.
Okay. So, and that obviously poses, look, any number of problems that I can't even begin to imagine just getting around. And even things like this, we mentioned before, answering the phone when a Facebook Messenger call comes in, all of these things which provide a day-to-day challenge. But then bringing it back to the hobby that we all, enjoy, how are you able to paint a model or build a model? How do you do these things?
Well, I don't actually paint the models myself. I've got really good people that paint my models for me, but I do still build the models by feel.
Right.
I still play 40K, and I'll be honest with you, when I first lost my sight, I had a break for a few years because I just didn't think I could do it. My head wasn't in the right place. I was all over the place. I'm sure you can probably imagine.
Yeah.
I was trying to get my life back on track, and all of this stuff. But eventually, I really missed the hobby, and I always loved like the lore, and I loved the modelling and painting. The painting side particularly, I was always an avid painter, and that's probably the thing I miss the most out of everything. Actually,
right. Yeah.
Even now. And I just started picking up Space Marine parts out of my bits box and just started doing a little bit of experimenting and gluing a few bits and pieces together. So we all know what the classic Space Marines are like. You've got a pair of legs, a torso front, a torso back, a backpack, a left arm, a right arm, shoulder pads and a head, and weapons.
Yeah.
So you can do that by feel and, have a go yourself. You'll find you can probably do it. It might be a little bit wibbly here and there, but you'll get the idea. And to be honest, I just built that skill back up again, just doing it by feel. And that's really how I started getting back into it.
That's amazing.
And then I started playing again and stuff like that. So, and here we are now, 16 years on.
So, again, I apologize if I'm asking technical questions because I think these are the things our listeners will be interested in and fascinated by. The building by feel, okay, I get that, even though I probably need instructions to do most of my stuff because they come with things where you're like, this right arm has to go with that left arm and things like that. But I'll buy that, building by feel. And obviously that's a skill that over the years you build up so that you're not going to be horrendously slow, which I'm sure I would be if I gave it a go right now. But then when it comes to the tabletop and you're pushing models around, I feel like for me, being able to see what's going on plays a big part. Do you have people describing the tabletop to you? Do you feel your way around it? How do you play?
I kind of do, but okay. So what I do in a nutshell is the guys that I play with in my little group. They're great. You know, they're awesome guys, and we've got this ongoing understanding. I'll ask a question. Look, I reckon that's 6.5 inches away. I'm going to measure it. Can you just double check it with me?
Right.
And you know, it's about 50-50. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes a little bit off. But again, you build it up a little bit, just like everybody does, just like every gamer does. Yeah. But I've always been really, really lucky because I've always had a very visual mind. I know that probably sounds a little bit weird, but I've always been able to imagine and map things in my head. And that's a real benefit when it comes to tabletop gaming, of course. So I actually had a game on Friday night, and we laid the table out. So what I do before we put any models down and deploy, I basically feel around the table, so I've got a rough idea where that building is in relation to that edge, and so on and so forth. And then we deploy our models, and the first thing I say to my opponent is, okay, show me your troop dispositions. And he'll grab, I literally, it sounds ridiculous when I explain it like this, but I literally put my hand over the table with my finger pointing down. He grabs my wrist and goes, okay, so I've got 10 Necron warriors there next to this building. I've got 3 Necron destroyers behind this building, so there's no line of sight, and so on and so forth. So that's how I do it. So deployment takes a little bit longer.
Right.
And then once I've got that picture in my head, so basically at the beginning of each battle round, I'll basically say, okay, right, let's do an update so I know where you've moved your models to and stuff like that. And that's kind of how it works. So it's a little bit slower, but
sure.
Of course, once you get used to it, it doesn't really impact on it too much.
Do you need any special gear to play the game?
The only things I really use that are any different to anybody else are I use tactile dice, so I haven't really got to rely on my opponents to read my dice for me, so right. I can literally, rather than feel the bumps on the dice, and obviously the opponent can see it as well. It's not like they're invisible to everybody else.
Right.
I do use a tactile tape measure if I'm measuring sort of 24 inches plus, and that's exactly as it sounds. It's just a normal tape measure with a little pip on each inch. But other than that, no, not really. Just the map in my brain and feel the models in the terrain, really. That's pretty much it.
Now, do you classify yourself as a competitive player? Do you ever go to tournaments?
Good grief, no.
Good grief.
I did actually always want to, but I never really got around to it when I could see. And now, to be honest with you, all right, there might be some events that would let me play, but I wouldn't feel comfortable because I know that although I'm not ridiculously slow, I am slower than other people.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, there isn't purely from my side of things, I wouldn't want to burden other people's play by me imposing on that. So, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm a casual player, I guess is the term that's used, isn't it? But no, we're perfectly happy. I love all elements of the hobby. It's not just the sticking models on the table and playing. I love building the models and coming up with the background of stuff and all that sort of stuff.
One of the great things is you get to hang out with your mates. I mean, that's one of the things we all love about the hobby the most is you get to enjoy just spending time with people you like and with whom you have something in common. Can I ask you, though, the most important question? What army do you play?
Oh, which armies? Well, I've actually got back into my I've been an avid Space Wolf player for well over 20 years.
I knew I liked you for a reason, James. I knew we'd have some connection there. Space Wolves.
Well, this is it. So I've started getting back into them a lot more actually because they've been neglected really for the last sort of 18 months or so. But I've been really, really enjoying them. But the game I played on Friday, right up until the 5th round, I'd completely forgotten to do all of my Savage Fury rolls. I couldn't believe it.
Well, That's standard. That's not a blind thing. That's all of us, man. That's just all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But no, I've got Space Wolves. I've got my own Space Marine chapter called the Storm Dragons, which are Salamander's successors, which of course are flavour of the month at the moment, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, really good.
I've got some Harlequins, Craft Lord Eldars, Drakari, Imperial Knights. So I've got quite a few.
Listen, mate, it's inspiring to talk to you. I think the fact that you're able to build and sure get someone to paint, but build and play, and when you have so many people talking on Facebook about chasing the meta this and the best units that, bringing it back to just, you know what, I enjoy the hobby. I like hanging out with guys, pushing models around a table and just having some fun. That's what it's got to be all about. And you
Absolutely.
are able
building
to do it.
That story.
Yeah, you're able to do it, and you love it so much that you do it now, despite the challenges that you're presented with. It's inspiring, and I feel honoured to talk to you. Thank you for being on the show.
Absolute pleasure, Steve. Thank you very much.
I super admire James's spirit. All right, next we get a great tip about chasing the meta from The Art of War's John Lennon. All right, as always, we have our weekly coaching tip with the one and only John Lennon. John, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
So what Art of War coaching tip do you have for our listeners this week?
Absolutely. So I'm going to talk today about kind of the pros and cons of switching to the new hotness versus staying at what you're comfortable with. As I'm sure you know, we will be getting a new Space Marine Codex next month. And if you haven't already hit that Space Marine bandwagon, it's going to be tempting. But I do want to talk to the listeners about how it's not always the best choice to just switch to an army right off the bat and expect to have that same amount of success. So something that I always talk about is, familiarity with the army and knowing what to do when you're making decisions is a very underrated, and it normally takes a lot of practice to get to that point. So if, for example, you're trying to play in a tournament in the month of October and you just want to pick up a Space Marine army that you've never played before and try to win, you're probably not going to have as much success as you like. I know a lot of people switched right to Space Marines before LVO last year and still went like 3-3, 4-2, which is probably the record that they might have gotten with their past army as well. How comfortable you are making decisions, how comfortable you are knowing your rules, and kind of knowing what your units are going to do makes a very big difference.
All right,
go ahead.
I was going to say, let's break that down a little bit. So how many reps would you say on average does it take to get to be proficient with an army? And what I mean by proficient is make mostly good decisions, understand how the army works. Maybe, it probably takes 100 games to really get an in-depth knowledge of an army, right? But there is a proficiency level where you can feel kind of comfortable before that. What do you think? Where do you think that threshold is?
So it's always going to depend from person to person. My personal rule is 10 games, where if I'm switching armies, and now if I'm taking a Tyranid list that I've played 10 times and I'm changing one unit, it's not going to take me 10 games to be comfortable. But let's say I went from Genestealer Cult to Space Marines, I would want to get at least 10 competitive games against players who I might play at a tournament to feel comfortable. Now, obviously, I'm not going to get any practice against, my 9-year-old cousin with Start Collecting Death Guard. But, if you actually talk to your friends, talk to clubmates, people at the local store, get games in against competitive armies. And ideally, you're losing a couple of these games because you're going to learn more when you lose. I think that 10 games is kind of my benchmark, where you want to get the army in a good situation so that you know how to execute it when you're in the right spot. You want to be in a bad spot so that you understand what the army does to get out of it. I consider myself very proficient with White Scars, but the first time I was in a bad spot with White Scars, I played the game wrong and I lost. And I have played it better since then. You want to hit a couple different benchmarks, and if you can do that in 3 games, maybe you're good at learning an army. But I would say 10 games is my recommended minimum.
Okay, so a good way to look at that too is if you're like a standard casual player, right? You play once a week at weekly game night, and you go to an RTT on the weekend. All right, so if you go to one RTT a month and play a weekly game night to get your 10 games of competitive play, it's like 2 months.
Yeah,
right. So yeah, and I mean that's a good way for people to think about it. So, and I think where the math really comes in is if you're going to switch armies, you're going to get a lot of practice and a lot of games in. So say you've got like a dedicated gaming group and you play, you travel to a GT every weekend. then it's probably more realistic to switch armies because you'll go through that learning curve faster and probably won't feel that frustration as much as you would if you spread that out over 2 months' time, right? Where you might be better off just playing something that you have true muscle memory with. Does that make sense?
Yes, I agree. So yeah, like especially like kind of look at which tournaments you want to be the one that you have success at. So if you've got like an RTT, that's a great place to get practice in. You get 3 games in. They're probably all going to be against people who are they're showing up to a tournament. They're bringing something that they think is decent. Like those are great practice games. Playing once a week at the local club. Maybe if you're learning a new army, maybe you invite an extra friend over. That week. Maybe on a weekend where you don't have an RTT, you have 2 friends over. You play 2 games. If you're being socially responsible, of course.
Of course,
If you're learning a new army, you could probably get it done in a month if you're putting the time in to learn the new army a little more than normal. Just have 2 game nights a week for 2 weeks, and maybe you get 8 games, and that's probably enough. 8 games or 9 games before you go to the big tournament. But I wouldn't just buy a new army, rush paint it in a week, and then play 1 game against your buddy on Friday night, and the tournament starts Saturday morning. You're setting yourself up for failure, and then you're going to be disappointed in the army, and that's a bad place to be in because you just invested a lot of money in it, probably, unless you already had a fully optimized Primaris Space Marine list lying around. Some of us do, but if so, you've probably already played it. You're probably not switching to it now.
Makes total sense, and I guess that's really what this lesson comes down to, right? Which is setting a realistic expectation based on the amount of time that you play. Chasing the meta is fine. Nothing wrong with that. Like if you want to go build a Salamander's army because you see that they're winning 74% of their games right now, just make sure you get enough practice in before you make a judgment as to whether or not the army is good, right? So, and the other flip side of that coin is if you want to get mastery in an army, there is an advantage to playing a list 100 plus times because you start really getting the nuance and the depth and start making even better decisions, and you can kind of squeeze out. I mean, it's a law of diminishing returns. You don't get as much invested for your time, but it allows you to maybe get a little higher than you would normally. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Now, again, if you're going to a tournament with the expectation of setting up for a future tournament, so like let's say you've got a grand tournament next month and you really want to do well at LVO, but you've got a grand tournament next month. If you're willing to accept like, hey, I'm going to switch to a new army and maybe I won't do much better, next month, but I'll be better in February. As long as you know that expectation for yourself, you'll feel better about your results and you'll learn more, honestly.
Absolutely. Okay, John, thank you so much. I think that's a great tip.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I always enjoy talking to you.
Count me in, and the mastery is better than chasing camp for most of us normal people. Welcome back. Wondering how to get that color scheme just right for your army? Lucky for you, our own Tanya Gates sits down with Simon Elsen and they let us know.
I'm here again with Simon Elsen, and he is going to give us a hobby tip today. You may remember Simon from a couple of weeks ago when we talked about his feature in White Dwarf, where he sort of got to explain the workings behind his Sons of Horus army, but he's here to help us paint a little bit better. So thank you so much for being on the show, Simon.
Yes, thank you for having me again.
Yeah, and you have some tips to help us maybe get our armies done a little bit faster today. So why don't you get us started?
Yeah, sure. That's the thing that when I do workshops with people at conventions and stuff, I get asked a lot, how can I get my army painted in a good quality faster? Because I think every hobbyist out there, me including, has a huge backlog of unpainted miniatures lying around.
Yep, I would say that's pretty accurate. My pile of shame is ginormous.
Yeah, I think that's part of the fun of the hobby, I guess. Yeah, and the thing that I can tell is you can paint a lot quicker if you plan your army first. So what I mean by that is usually when I have a new project, I have a vision in mind how I want the army to look, but I'm not quite sure how to get it done in the colors, in the color scheme, where to put the colors, stuff like that. So what I usually do is I take a couple of test miniatures, usually in exactly the same pose. I use the easy to build Space Marines most of the time when I plan a new legion. And I build them the same way, like 4 to 5 miniatures. And then I start experimenting on certain things that I have in mind. Let's say if I have I'm right now doing a word bearers army, or I'm planning to do a word bearers army. And before I'm going into mass producing all that stuff, I sat down and I painted 5 word bearers in slightly different tones. I first started with a 100% contrast color over a silver primer. And then I decided, well, that is too dark. Then I did another miniature, same undercoat, but I took the color and thinned it down with medium 50%. Then I decided, well, that's too bright. And then after the third or the fourth time, I had the right mixture. And then I started to think about where to put enhancement colors, secondary and tertiary colors. And I do that as long as I'm satisfied with one miniature, so that I have one template, I guess you can call it, a miniature template that I can always refer to. I also write down each step that I took to get there. And when I have this template done, I can start mass producing. And from there on, I can always go back to the template, and I don't have to worry so much and to think about where do I put this color now and stuff like that. So I have made any decision for the whole army in the test phase. And from that point forward, I can just paint away, I guess.
Yeah, I actually do something very similar, and I keep like a journal along
That's
the way.
good,
But
yeah.
people don't realize how much time the decision-making process can actually eat up of your painting time.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so that's actually a really great tip. But is there any reason why you use the easy to build minis? Is it just because they're plentiful, or is there some other reason?
Yeah, the easy to build stuff is pretty cheap.
Mhm.
And I want the template to be the exact same miniature. So if I want a standard Space Marine that holds his weapon in the same place and has its purity seal on the same spot and stuff like that, the easy to build stuff is pretty much it's easy build accessible, and it's exact the same pose. So when I have like 5 to 10 different test pieces and they have all exactly the same pose, I can compare them pretty good.
That makes total sense. I think that this has been a really great hobby tip, and I see the value in it. And we'll make sure to put links to all of your social media as well, so people can see what this process looks like in action. Thank you so much for being on the show, Simon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That was a great tip. Okay, one of the best parts of doing this podcast is getting to talk to people from around the world. I got to sit down with Tomasz and Mikhail from the Contact Loss podcast to talk all about the 40K scene in Poland. All right, 40K Today listeners, we have a very special treat. We've got Tomasz and Mikhail both joining us all the way from Poland. They heard our interviews with the Russian folks that we had on, and they thought, you know what, we should talk about Poland. And I'm super excited about it, and I'm really hoping that this opens the gateway for other countries to reach out and be like, hey, we want to talk. We want to come. Let all of you guys know all about us too. So welcome to the program. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about your podcast that you guys are doing, and then we'll talk about what's going on in Poland.
So yeah, hi everyone. It's really nice to be here. I'm Tomasz, also known as Tweak, and I'm joined here by Michał, also known as Joker.
Yep. Hello, everyone, and thanks, John, for having us.
So basically, we figured out that if John invites people from other countries, why not invite someone from Poland? as you probably know, Polish scene and Polish meta is quite strong. We have our Polish national team going to the European championships or European team championships every single year, usually placing somewhere in the top 3. So yeah, we created a podcast because we thought that it's a niche that you don't really get to hear a lot about Polish players, Polish meta, um, Polish preparations for the ETC, etc. So we thought, okay, let's do something like that. Let's, we can speak English, and hopefully we can make it interesting.
Yeah, and I think the great part, which you were sort of pointing out before we started this, was we're all playing the same game now, right? So we can have like a lot more fruitful conversations because, in the past, ITC and WTC/ETC formats were so different that the lists really didn't translate and the strategies didn't really translate. I mean, 40K is 40K, don't get me wrong, but you couldn't do a very good direct comparison. And now we all live in the same world, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, with the situation in the new edition, it's really become an opportunity for us to attack this Western world and Western 40K.
Yeah, that sounded ominous.
Yeah, come get us. Come get us. We deserve it. So let's talk about Poland specifically. You guys do some really cool stuff. How do you guys select your ETC team? You said that was quite a process, right?
I mean, yeah, it's quite systemic, I would say, because normally you have a bunch of tournaments throughout the year that you have to attend. You call them RTTs and GTs. We call them locals and masters, but they're pretty much the same thing. And the qualification, whether it's a local competition or a master competition, depends on the amount of players that participate. These are usually announced somewhere around the beginning of the year. So each city that wants to organize a tournament has at least one or maybe sometimes 2 coordinators, and they represent the city in the national league. So they announce when they would like to organize a tournament, and then a calendar is built so that players can plan a year up front where they want to go and what is going to happen when. And then points from those tournaments are accumulated in the league. So on top of that, there are like local leagues that you can play, and you get points for that as well. And at the end of the year, those points are summed up, and you have, the roster in the league, and the rules say that the players from the top 3 can become part of the national team. So it's really motivating for people to actually go to those tournaments, to play regularly, because at the end of the day, they could be selected as part of the national team and go to the ETC and the ESC.
Top 3 actually. Sorry for jumping in. Just so clarify a bit, the top 3 gets selected automatically, and then the other 5 players are picked by, let's say, team managers that we had. We vote and pick, by a vote from all the coordinators, let's say, so people who are running the communities and, let's say, bigger cities. And that's how 8 players are picked for the team.
Cool. So then you guys you said something I want to focus on a little bit and kind of just bypass. You just said national league. I think that's really cool. So you guys got a nationwide league where you keep track of points, which is separate, but it reminds me of the ITC, which is like a circuit, right? We would call that a circuit. And so I'd like to have you guys back sometime to talk about some of the people on the top of your leaderboard. I think that would be really cool to get to know some of the Polish players, that kind of thing. Why don't you tell us, like, what is 40K like in Poland? Is it? And I will say, just before we get into that, you guys are savage wargamers, because in War Machine and Hordes, which is the other world that I was in, the Polish also were always top 3 at the WTC. Right.
So the Polish scene is, I would say, it's quite competitive. Every year, the league, if you look at the roster, there are probably around 300 players who appear in that league, and the top 100, top 70, I would say, are the ones that you can meet fairly regularly at tournaments. And the top 10 is very similar every single year, but those are usually the players that have been playing for more than 10 years or something like that, and everyone knows them. Everyone knows that they have incredible skill, but what every single, for example, when there are captains of the national team, when they get selected, what they would do, they would usually organize additional events all around the country. They would travel the country and they would meet people who aspire to be on the national team, and they would play with them. They would see whether there is, potential, whether they are good material for candidates, or to be part of the national team. So it's really motivating, and people really know each other well, and it's completely like a circuit, like you described. It's just something local for Poland.
It sounds like you guys take the national team very seriously, which I think is really cool. I think that's really, really cool.
We do, because if you think about it, all the major tournaments that take place, they follow the ETC or the WTC rules pack. So whenever there was any sort of tournament, we would play the missions and we would play it the way that the national team does. And also the crown jewel of what the competition play that you can have in Poland is something called the National Team Championships. This is an event that happens one a year, and it's like the summary of the entire season, where also the awards for the league are presented, etc. And this is a team tournament. So this is, the ETC is like an 8-man tournament. It's really difficult to build an 8-man team, to have a tournament within the country with teams that are so big. But the national team tournament is 5-man teams, and really this shows who is the best material for the national team.
That's cool. How many teams do you guys typically have at those?
Joker, do you remember? We organized this last year.
Yeah. Before 8, it was somewhere around 13 teams. But last year, when we ran it, it was 26 teams. I think it was 130 people that we had at the event. And
wow, that's a good size event, because Poland is, it's not a small country, but it's also not a super large country, right?
40K isn't that popular as well, so it's not that big a community. I mean, you usually know all the other people from other cities anyway. But a really cool thing about the National Team Championship is also that people who don't usually play competitively also like to come and just enjoy the atmosphere of wargaming, have fun, drink a beer, and play some games.
Yeah, it's a proper holiday. It's not just a competition. It's actually a holiday. It's usually a 2-day event. So last year when we organized it in a hotel where people could, play during the day, sleep at night, and there was like an open bar so people could use it, etc. We had all sorts of sponsors from all around the country and from abroad who provided awards, and there was really a lot of cool stuff to win. So people are usually attracted by the prizes, but mainly by the possibility to just meet with one another, to have a drink with one another, and then to show some of their competitive skills that they have.
And we even had a team from Russia last year.
True.
Very cool. That's very cool. So it sounds to me actually like it's a very similar experience that it is here in the United States. I always like to say the first time you go to a tournament or an event is for the competition, and then all the rest of the times you go back to hang out with your friends. So it's like you make friends, and that becomes the point, not necessarily winning.
Yeah, the after parties are the real event you go to.
Are the hot?
For some, yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come to give us a little bit of a glimpse of the Polish scene. And what I'd like to do is have you guys back on here, and we'll talk maybe around when you have the team tournament or some other events. And then if you'll send me a link to your podcast, I'll definitely put it in the show notes. You guys should check it out, at least if you want to get an idea of what's going on in Poland. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have time and if you want to check it out, then try searching for Contact Lost either on YouTube. We're now on Spotify, iTunes, and so on. So Contact Lost podcast. If you want to find out something more about the Polish meta, then feel more than invited to.
Make sure you check out the Contact Lost podcast. It's in English, so there's no excuses. Okay, here it comes. It's time for Model of the Week.
It's the model of the day, the
The model of the day, the model of the day.
Every day during our regular weekday show, we feature a model of the day, and we've been able to show off some stunning work this week. This week's model of the week is one you might have already seen. We got an absolutely stunning piece from Pintornado's Miniatures. This Space Marine Redemptor Dreadnought is stunning with its deep shadows and bright highlights. The crisp paint job is chock full of details like shine effects on the gems and glow effects on the plasma. The base is lovely to take on the rivalry between the Thousand Suns and the Sons of Russ. If you have a model that we should feature on the show, or if you've seen a model that should be featured on the show, let us know with our hashtag on Instagram, hashtag 40K, the number 2, DAY, or toss us a message to our Facebook. And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed getting a peek at the fun stuff we did this week. A big thanks to our content producer, Alex Boehner, and our social media superstar, Tanya Gates, and our technical producer, Seamus Ronan, for all their hard work once again in putting this program together. If you liked what you heard on the show today, make sure you come check us out at 40ktoday.com or on your favorite podcast platform. We do a 15-minute show every day with the kind of information that was found in today's show. We'll see you next week. Until then, for Paul Murphy and Steve Joel and the rest of the 40K Today team, I'm John Damaris, and that's what's happening with 40K Today.